So Western Cape Community Safety MEC Albert Fritz says the latest crime statistics indicate the province is making some progress in fighting crime. In fact, the province plans to spend 1.3 billion rand over 4 years with the goal of halving the murder rate over the next 10 years. It also seeks to address the root causes of crime by working with government departments, with the SAPS and the City of Cape Town. Let's unpack what all of this means. Amanda Dissel is Director of Policy and Research at the Western Cape Department of Community Safety. She joins us now via our video link. Amanda, thanks very much for your time this morning on the AM Report. In fact, I want to begin this morning as we reflect on the 7 years since the Khayelitsha inquiry. Let's begin our discussion with where we are, as far as you know, with those 20 recommendations that the inquiry mapped out on how to proceed with the challenges in Khayelitsha.
Good morning. Yes, with the recommendations at the Department of Community Safety, we've been monitoring the recommendations, particularly in the early years. We had a joint task team together with the police and several other stakeholders, and we were monitoring the implementation of them. There are some of the recommendations that depend on national level policy and decision making in order to make a change, and some of those haven't changed. So one of our biggest concerns in regard to the Khayelitsha Commission recommendations was the system for the allocation of human resources in Khayelitsha. And unfortunately, that still hasn't changed. That is currently the subject of litigation through the Equality Court. In 2018, the Equality Court found that the system for the allocation of human resources in the Western Cape does in fact discriminate against black and poor people. The SAPS was to come up with, in participation and consultation with the parties to the court case, with a new system for the allocation of human resources. This unfortunately hasn't happened, and the matter has now gone to the Constitutional Court. So we are hoping that the Constitutional Court will require that the SAPS does engage in that discussion around that allocation of resources. So we still see some unfair allocation of human resources in Khayelitsha, as well as to other areas which are affected by high levels of violent crime. Many of the other issues we are working on together with the police, but there are still some problems. We see that overall in the country, the number of police officials has declined as a result of budget cuts, and this, of course, is the case in Khayelitsha as well. Yeah.
Amanda, if I can come in there, you know, I think saying that there are still some problems is perhaps quite a broad statement in an area where the same massive threats to life and safety for very vulnerable groups of people, not least of which young women and young children, those are arguably still the same, if not worse than when the inquiry began 7 years ago.
Absolutely. I think that the Western Cape, as many other countries, are completely affected by crime, and we've been monitoring in Khayelitsha. So in Khayelitsha, we haven't seen much changes. Khayelitsha and Harare, particularly, are still among our top 10 murder stations in the country, or among the top 30 murder stations in the country. We've had also issues of in-migration into Khayelitsha, informal settlements, people occupying land. So a lot of those problems have actually got worse in that area, and we see crime increasing. Encouragingly,
yeah, go ahead. On a positive note, you were about to say something?
So on a positive note, in the last quarter, we have seen a slight decrease in the number of murders in Khayelitsha, and we've been tracking that also for the last couple of weeks of this quarter. So there has been a slight decline. We're not quite sure what is happening there, but those are some of the positive signs that we need to take into account.
Insofar as who should be held to account around implementing the recommendations of the Khayelitsha inquiry, how does your department factor into that? And I'll tell you why I'm asking that question. Because some of the things that have been implemented, and there are very few, of the 20 recommendations that have been implemented. One of those is around lighting in certain areas in Khayelitsha. Now, the Social Justice Coalition tells us that the lighting is wholly inadequate for what it's needed for. I'm not sure what the technical term is, but it's the kind of lighting that casts shadows around if someone is let's say, attacked in the street at night, the kind of lighting that's been provided puts a shadow on that person and its surrounds. So victims have great difficulty in identifying their perpetrator. So the lighting is wholly inadequate. How are these decisions being made around implementing the recommendations, and are they completely separate from the community themselves?
No. Well, I mean, I think that's one of the challenges that we are trying to grapple with. At the moment, the Western Cape government is implementing a whole of government and whole of society approach to tackling safety in 11 high priority areas in the Western Cape, or in the city of Cape Town. And Khayelitsha and Harare are two of the areas that we are looking at. So that process aims to get the whole of government together, including the city of Cape Town, national government and the Western Cape government together, to look at some of the challenges facing safety in the areas. So this would, of course, include lighting. It would include developmental issues, urban development, and structural issues in the area, as well as what we also want to do is work with community-based organizations and communities themselves to try and work with them to address some of the problems of crime. So this is really about helping, getting all communities involved, identifying the problem areas, trying to provide opportunities for training and education. So we want to address the problems that give rise to safety and give rise to crime in the first place from a preventative point of view, improve opportunities, improve education, but also tackle problematic behavior. So dealing with arguments, dealing with conflict, dealing with alcohol and drug abuse, and also tackling gender-based violence. So these are the issues that we really want to concentrate going forward.
So you talk about, one of the issues that you've raised is also being in conversation with the kinds of organizations that do work on the ground, civil society organizations like the Social Justice Coalition, which is the organization that went to the Equality Court, that decision that you just mentioned as well, around black and poor people being more discriminated against insofar as human resources, police human resources in particular, is concerned. So how much of your department, your Director of Policy and Research in the Western Cape for community safety, have you spoken to the Social Justice Coalition on these particular issues?
We have not recently, but we work very closely with them, particularly in the initial years after the commission. They were part of the task team that was formed in order to implement the recommendations, the 20 recommendations, and we had regular meetings with the Social Justice Coalition as well as the CPF from that area and several other organizations. They also formed part of a priority committee that was ongoing from 2018, which engaged all the community-based organizations, the CPFs and so on in Khayelitsha. At this point, with the area-based teams, we are starting with more on community-based organizations and the much more local level organizations, as well as the Khayelitsha Development Forum, the CPFs, and the ward councillors in the area.
So let's talk a bit about the Western Cape Community Safety MEC and the comments he made in light of the crime stats released by the police minister. He says the safety plan in the Western Cape is working, the province is making progress in fighting crime. I suppose the question for certain communities is it working in only particular areas in the province?
Well, we've noticed that there has been a decrease in murder in Bishop Lavis, in Philippi, and in Nyanga. And I think that those are very encouraging signs. What we really need to do is to try and unpack what are the factors that have contributed to to the reduction of murders in those cases. But we also need to look at what is the factors contributing to the increase of murder in other areas. So we are looking very closely at that, and we're hoping to work very closely with the police and law enforcement to address some of those issues. So one of the methods that we've used in tackling violence in the priority areas that I'm talking about, the 11 priority areas, is to work with the law enforcement advancement program, that is the deployment of law enforcement officers, who work very closely with the South African police in those areas to tackle crime. And so they have quite targeted approach to dealing with crime in those areas. But we also need to be supported by the police detective services and crime intelligence in order to tackle the more organized forms of violence. And that's an issue that we need to tackle with the provincial commissioner and the management of the South African police.
Amanda, if you'd allow me to ask you just one more question around the Khayelitsha inquiry. It's a big story we're reflecting on today, given that it's 7 years since the inquiry released its report today. In terms of the Makaza police station, the Social Justice Coalition telling us that the only thing that's happened so far is that it has built a wall to try and cordon off the lands that has been set aside for the police station to be built. Can you give us an update on why there's been a delay and when this is going to be a reality 7 years later, 7 years since that report?
Well, I have noticed that is a case, that the Makaza police station is still in the planning phase, and that nothing has done with the implementation of the police station. It is something that the ministry will be following up also with the police. I think that they had planned that it would be built in 2022 or something like that, but it hasn't yet been developed.
In your experience, is that how long it takes?
Well, we must say that since the time of the Commission, only one additional police station has been added to the Western Cape, and that was in Samora Machel. So the police are very, very slow in establishing new police stations. One of the problems that the Commission was concerned about was that if a new police station would be established, that it would result in the police taking human resources away from some of the other police stations in order to staff that. The problem is that the police only get a particular pool of human resources, and they have to spread that across the police stations in the Western Cape. And as a result, it might result in some kind of dilution of the police human resources. So that is one of the concerns as well. It's no use we have a new police station, we don't actually have the human resources to staff it. But that is one of the things that the Western Cape government is monitoring and is very concerned about.
Yeah, big issue. Amanda Dissel, thanks very much for your time this morning on this incredibly important story, safety in particular areas in the Western Cape. She's Director of Policy and Research in that province's Department of Community Safety. Thanks very much indeed.